They didn't think I heard them. The kitchen was filled with the clatter of plates and the hum of mismatched conversations, but I wasn't saying much. I rarely do when the family comes over. Not because I don't have things to say, I just learned a long time ago that listening often reveals more than talking. This time, it was my granddaughter Sadie's voice I caught first, high and fast, the way young people speak when they're trying too hard to be clever. "I mean, look at this," she giggled. "It's like a yard sale exploded." I turned just slightly in the dining chair, pretending to reach for a napkin, and caught her in the reflection of the hallway mirror. She stood at the edge of the sideboard, lifting the lid of my old jewelry box. The big one, mahogany with a cracked velvet lining. My husband bought it for me on our 20th anniversary. She held up a gold locket, its clasp slightly crooked after all these years. "It's not even real," she said, scrunching her nose. "I could get the same thing at Forever 21 for $12. From the kitchen, her mother, my daughter-in-law, Nicole, chimed in. "Oh, don't tell your grandmother that. She swears that stuff is heirloom material." They laughed. I folded my napkin once, then again, and set it on the plate. No one noticed. The table was still full, my son Mark talking stocks with my nephew Jordan, Nicole refilling drinks, Sadie browsing my things like a flea market vendor. No one asked me about the lasagna or the carrot cake I stayed up until midnight frosting. They ate, drank, spoke over me, and sifted through my history like it was costume clutter. It wasn't the first time they'd done it. A few months ago, Sadie borrowed a pair of earrings, gold filigree with tiny blue stones. I'd told her they were a gift from my late husband, Joseph, and she smiled sweetly and promised to treat them like treasure. When she returned them, one post was bent. She didn't even apologize, just said, "You really should get sturdier backs." And still, I said nothing. Back then, I thought it was just carelessness, immaturity. But tonight was different. Tonight it wasn't just damage, it was dismissal. Nicole passed by me at one point, balancing a wine glass and her phone. She paused, looked down at my brooch, an opal cabochon set in a silver circle, and said, "You know, if you ever want to declutter, I could help you sort through this stuff. Some of it's just gathering dust." I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because nodding is easier than explaining why I wear that brooch every Sunday, why I touch it when I feel nervous, why it once belonged to my mother, who wore it to her immigration hearing the year we came to the States. But to Nicole, it was just old, outdated, something to toss in a box and drive to Goodwill. I stood from the table with slow deliberation and began collecting plates. Nicole waved me off. "Oh no, Nana, sit down, we'll take care of cleanup." But none of them moved. So I walked into the kitchen, scraping plates alone while their voices carried in from the next room, still chuckling about my eclectic style. That word stuck with me. Eclectic. It was the word someone once used to describe me when I sold handmade bracelets at the Sunday flea market. When Joseph was still alive, and I still had a booth next to the pretzel stand, I'd make $50 on a good day, not because the jewelry was expensive, but because it told stories. Now, it was a punchline. I stood at the sink and watched my own reflection in the window, a small, round woman, in too many scarves, with thick glasses sliding down her nose. My curly gray hair had begun to flatten with the heat from the stove, and the kitchen light made every wrinkle on my olive-toned face stand out like seams on an old quilt. But I didn't feel old. Not really, just archived, like they'd already decided who I was and where I belonged, tucked into a cabinet of memories, to be polished for show and ignored otherwise. That night, after everyone left, I walked through the quiet living room, now littered with coffee mugs and a half-folded blanket. On the sideboard, the jewelry box sat ajar. Inside, I noticed one piece missing, a pair of mosaic earrings from Morocco. I knew Sadie had slipped them into her bag. There wasn't even a note. I closed the lid gently and carried the box into my room. I placed it on the bed and sat beside it. Slowly, I opened each drawer. Each compartment held more than metal and glass. The green cameo Joseph found in a thrift shop because it looked like your mother. The copper cuff I made after my first chemotherapy. The tiny ring with initials on the inside, N+J. They weren't just things, they were timestamps, and I was the only one left who remembered what each piece survived. I reached beneath the bed and pulled out a small photo album. I flipped through the pages until I reached the picture I was looking for, Delia. Her smile was crooked in that photo, but full of life. The last time she ever called me Mama Ruth, before the family turned her into a pariah, before they blamed her for the divorce, the rehab, the phone calls that went unanswered. They hated her now. But once, she had called my wire-wrapped earrings witchy in the best way. Once, she looked at my old brooch and said, "God, this feels like it's seen something real." That was enough. I placed the photograph on the jewelry box, folded my hands, and sat in silence for a long while. And somewhere between the kitchen clocks ticking and the wind knocking gently on the shutters, I made a decision. It was almost midnight when I started sorting the pieces. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I didn't want clarity. I wanted shadow, dim lamplight casting soft gold over old metal, blurring the edges of what I was about to do. My jewelry box had always been organized like a library, necklaces in the top tray, rings in the side drawers, brooches tucked behind velvet flaps. Tonight, that order no longer mattered. I was making piles. Not by type, but by weight, emotional weight. The first pile was easy. Joseph's things, the ones I'd never part with. His wedding band, the tiny charm bracelet he once bought at a gas station after forgetting our anniversary. He wrapped it in tissue and said, "It's not much, but it jingles." I'd worn it that night just to see him smile. Those stayed. The second pile was harder. These were the beautiful pieces, the ones Sadie would one day inherit if she had ever asked about them. An antique citrine pendant from my mother, a glass-beaded choker I'd bartered for at a bazaar in Marrakesh, a bracelet made of sea glass strung together with fishing wire and faith. They were beautiful because they weren't expensive. They were beautiful because they were worn during real moments. But that beauty had become invisible to my family. The third pile was what I called the maybe collection. Pins, earrings, mismatched bits that once meant something but had faded with time. I left them aside. Then I brought out a piece of paper. I drew 2 columns. On the left, items. On the right, stories. Not values, not materials, stories. Blue mosaic earrings, bought in Santa Fe, 1974. Joseph had just gotten the promotion. Heart-shaped pendant, worn when I met my granddaughter for the first time. She reached for it before she reached for my hand. Silver leaf brooch, the only thing I wore to my father's funeral that didn't feel borrowed from someone else's idea of mourning. I filled 2 pages. Then I stopped. I wasn't crying, but I was winded, like I'd just spoken all these names aloud for the first time in years. I folded the list and slid it into an envelope marked "Read before judgment." Then I reached for the old photo of Delia again. She'd been gone for 6 years, exiled, really, not by me, by them. The family had decided she was too unstable, too loud, too defiant when she walked away from her marriage to my nephew, Peter. I never picked sides out loud, but privately, I wrote her letters every Christmas. None of them were answered. Still, I knew where she was. My cousin Janine had mentioned that Delia had opened a non-profit, a center for women leaving abusive situations, helping them restart their lives with clothes, interviews, a roof. "She's good at it," Janine had said once. "Too good. It makes everyone else feel guilty." That night, I found the website. It was simple. A pale yellow homepage with a banner that read, "You are not broken. You are becoming." There was a number listed. I didn't call. I wrote an email. "Dear Delia, you may not want to hear from me, but I have a few things I'd like to pass on, not because they're valuable, but because they've been overlooked. And I believe you know what to do with things like that. I don't need anything in return, just a meeting. Ruth." I hesitated before clicking send. My hand hovered over the mouse like it was made of glass. And then it was gone, delivered into the void where all hope goes to wait. I didn't expect a response. But at 7:14, the next morning, it came. "Ruth, of course I remember you. I'd be honored to meet. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. at the cafe on Rosemont, if that still exists. I'll be the one with red shoes. Delia, Dulia, Fanninga, Woftitimissivuna why. I rigiradu define that with ishambeju butegen maive, and yubis, having grown to volley, damacata be, ye corthusitiris a piece defined to dovdi, where she be cut mafkadalder." I read the message twice, then again, and then I folded the page where I'd listed the stories and tucked it into my purse like a passport. The rest of the day was filled with small, determined movements. I boxed the jewelry, each piece nestled in a cloth pouch. I tied the whole thing with a long silk ribbon from my sewing drawer, maroon and deep as dried blood. Then I slid everything into a canvas tote. By noon, I had dressed carefully, black slacks, a soft gray tunic, and my most battered pair of flats. Around my neck, 3 scarves layered like pages of an old book, one navy, one olive, one the color of dried roses. I didn't wear any jewelry. That felt important. By 2:45, I was at the cafe, seated near the window. It had changed since I'd last visited. Brighter walls, louder music, baristas with half-shaved heads and matching tattoos. I felt out of place, but not unwelcome. At exactly 3, I saw them. The shoes. Red leather, scuffed at the toes. Delia stepped through the door wearing a long tan coat and a knitted beanie pulled low. Her eyes scanned the room, then locked onto mine. I stood. She approached slowly, her expression unreadable, until she was close enough to touch. Then her face softened, and she said only one word. "Hi." I nodded. "You came." She sat, placed her hands around her coffee cup like it was something sacred, and looked at the tote bag beside my feet. "What's all this?" "A story," I said, "in pieces." Delia reached for the ribbon before she reached for the envelope. Her hands were steadier than I remembered. The last time I'd seen her, at Peter's second wedding if I'm not mistaken, she'd been skinnier, distracted, a barely present ghost haunting the periphery of polite conversation. Now she was quiet, but grounded. Her fingers were strong, methodical, as she untied the ribbon and opened the canvas tote like she already knew it was sacred. She didn't speak right away. She didn't need to. The first thing she lifted was the sea glass bracelet. Her thumb ran over the worn green shard at the center, then paused. "This looks like something from Brighton Beach," she murmured. "I remember you used to keep little jars of polished stones in the window." I smiled. "Still do." Delia smiled back, but her eyes didn't lift. They stayed on the bracelet, tracing each knotted thread. "I thought they threw all this out," she said after a long pause. "Back when they cleared your garage, Nicole told me." She stopped, hesitated. "Well, you know what she told me." "I know," I replied gently. "They like to clean the past when it doesn't match the living room." Delia gave a dry laugh. "That sounds like them." She reached into the bag again and pulled out the brooch. The opal was duller now, but still caught light when she turned it. "I remember this," she whispered. "You wore it to my college graduation. I always thought it looked like a galaxy caught in a marble." "That was my mother's," I said. "She wore it to her immigration hearing, said it gave her courage. I wore it to Joseph's funeral." Delia looked up. "And now?" "Now it's for whoever needs it most." I handed her the envelope, the one labeled "Read Before Judgment." She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the 2 sheets. Her eyes scanned the list of jewelry and the stories beside each one. I didn't speak as she read. I just watched the way her jaw clenched softly at certain names, relaxed at others. She finished and folded the paper back with a precision that told me it mattered. "You sure?" she asked. "These don't just belong to you. They belong to people who don't see them," I interrupted. "People who think inheritance is about price tags and probate, not memory." She took a slow breath. "I work with women who've lost everything. Homes, names, even the ability to look strangers in the eye. But sometimes when we give them something personal, something they can wear with weight and pride, it changes how they walk into the room." "I know," I said softly. "That's why you're the only one I trust with this." Her fingers hovered over the velvet pouch that held the cameo pendant. She didn't open it. She just placed her palm on it, gently, as if saying yes without words. "You know," she said, "there was a time I hated every reminder of the family. I couldn't stand to even think about where I came from." "You weren't wrong to leave," I said. "You were wrong to think I stayed behind." Delia looked up sharply. "I heard what they said after you left," I continued. "They made it sound like you were the storm, but you were just the one who stopped pretending." She blinked hard and looked away. We sat in silence for a few minutes. The cafe around us continued its quiet rhythm, machines hissing steam, a barista humming under their breath, the bell on the door jingling every so often, but in our corner it felt like time had paused. Finally, Delia gathered the pouch and the envelope, slipping both into her worn leather bag. "I'll keep the stories with the pieces," she said, "if that's okay. That's the only reason I gave them to you." She smiled, but it didn't fully reach her eyes. "Not yet. What do you plan to tell them?" she asked. I shrugged. "That I downsized, or forgot, or gave things to charity." "They'll be furious when they find out," she said. "They already are," I replied, "just not for the right reasons." Delia nodded slowly, then reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. "You're not like them." "I raised one of them," I said quietly. "But I don't belong to them anymore." That was the truth of it. The house where we gathered on holidays wasn't mine. The name they used for me, Nana Ruth, was a placeholder, a character in their theater of obligation. But this, sitting across from a woman everyone had tried to forget, handing her pieces of history they called worthless, this felt real. We stood to leave, and Delia hugged me. Not a performative embrace, a quiet, still one, the kind that lingers in your spine long after the contact ends. Before she left, she turned and asked, "Can I tell the women who this came from?" I thought for a moment. Tell them it came from someone who remembers how heavy beauty can be, and how good it feels when someone finally sees it again. She nodded once. Then she was gone. I stayed behind, holding my coffee like a paper lantern, watching the light thin across the floor. Outside, the sky was bruised with evening. I stepped out and began walking slowly toward the bus stop. The wind picked up, tugging gently at my scarves, wrapping them around me like armor. I had given away what mattered, not the things, but the meaning, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel stripped. I felt lighter, seen, chosen by the person everyone else had abandoned. It was a different kind of inheritance, the kind you give when you're ready to be remembered honestly. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was the silence, not the gentle kind like in the cafe earlier that day, but the stale, expectant quiet of a house that had been entered and left without permission. I knew it before I flipped the switch and saw that the hallway lamp was off kilter. Not broken, just nudged slightly left, the way Nicole always rearranged things when she was tidying. And then there was the faint, sweet scent of her perfume, cloying, too citrusy, lingering like a cough in the air. They'd been here. The living room appeared mostly untouched, at first glance, cushions fluffed, curtains just barely out of alignment. But my eyes went to the coffee table, where I'd left a small crystal dish filled with safety pins and old buttons. It was gone. I walked toward the bedroom with measured steps. My feet didn't make a sound against the wood floors, but my breath had picked up. The jewelry box was still gone. Delivered, donated, rehomed. That wasn't the part I feared. What I feared was the possibility that they'd come looking for what they thought I had left behind. I opened the closet. The boxes were all there, labeled, stacked, undisturbed from a distance. But one, keepsakes, kitchen drawer was slit open down the side, and the envelope of handwritten recipes from my mother-in-law was partially removed, crumpled slightly at the corner. They hadn't bothered to put it back properly. And that's what made me sit down. Not the violation, not the search, but the laziness. They hadn't come for memories, they'd come for assets. I opened the drawer of my writing desk. A small file folder held my will, updated, signed, notarized just 4 months earlier, and a set of photocopies detailing the donation of the jewelry. I took it out, scanned it briefly, and placed it in my bag. Then I picked up the pen and wrote a note on the back of a grocery receipt. If you're looking for what you missed, maybe try asking. Love, Ruth. I placed it in the now empty crystal dish and left it on the kitchen counter. That was my message. The phone rang at 6:52 p.m. I didn't pick up. It rang again at 7:05, then again at 7:12. Voicemails were piling up, and I could hear Nicole's voice even without pressing play. Her tone had a way of leaning toward sweetness when it was most artificial. Finally, I sat down and listened. "Hi Ruth, it's Nicole. Not sure if you meant to lock the spare key drawer, but we had to stop by for something and couldn't find it, so I hope you don't mind we let ourselves in. Anyway, Sadie wanted to borrow one of the necklaces for her senior portrait. She said you'd be okay with it. If you could call me back when you get a second, that'd be great. Thanks." Another beep. "Hi again. So, we noticed the jewelry box is gone. I know it's probably getting cleaned or something, but Sadie's a little upset. She had her eye on the cameo you wore last Christmas. Just wanted to make sure everything's okay. Let us know." Then one from my son, Mark. "Mom, I'm gonna be honest. This is a little confusing. Nicole said you're not answering. Can you just let me know where the jewelry is? If it's at the cleaners or in storage or something? I thought we'd talked about passing it on to Sadie someday. She's your only granddaughter." That was the one that stung. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like the jewelry was a family contract, and I had breached it. I didn't call back. Instead, I poured myself a glass of water, sat in my armchair by the window, and watched as a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway across the street. A woman stepped out holding a baby in one arm and a bag of groceries in the other. She kicked the car door closed with her foot and then paused to wave at someone inside before heading to the porch. There was no audience, no ceremony, just her, doing what needed to be done. I thought of Delia, of how she had taken the brooch and said nothing sentimental, just nodded once, like it had always belonged with her. There was a knock on the door, 3 short taps. Then silence. I stood, but didn't open it. I waited. Eventually, there was the soft shuffle of retreating footsteps, and when I finally pulled the door open, I found an envelope on the mat. No address, no name, just my own handwriting, returned to me. The list. The one I had given Delia, folded now into a new envelope. Inside was a small note in her hand. Some stories deserve to come with the gift, but some need to be remembered only by the person who carried them. Keep this, let the rest move forward. I held the paper to my chest, and for the first time in years I felt like someone had understood what I hadn't said aloud. This wasn't about heirlooms, it was about being seen, truly seen, not as a keeper of things, but as the one who once lived them. And if my son couldn't see that, if Sadie only wanted sparkle for a photo, then they weren't the ones who deserved the memory. That night, I put the list in the fireplace, not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need proof anymore. Delia had seen the truth. And now, that truth would live elsewhere, in hands that knew the weight of history and in eyes that recognized the difference between possession and presence. By the time the mail arrived the next morning, I'd already baked a loaf of walnut bread and wiped down every surface in the kitchen twice. I wasn't restless, I was preparing. Because I knew what would be in that envelope before I even saw the return address. A pale manila rectangle, my name printed too neatly, no stamp, just hand-delivered, quietly, the way guilt likes to travel. Inside was a letter. Typed. Formal. With all the pleasantries of someone pretending to care. Dear Ruth, we understand there may have been some miscommunication about the family jewelry. Given Sadie's sentimental attachment to certain items and your previous verbal assurances, we'd love the opportunity to clarify any decisions made about their future distribution. We hope to speak soon to avoid any further confusion. With love, Nicole and Mark. I folded the letter slowly, pressing the crease with the edge of my thumbnail, and set it beside the bread. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and effort, but the paper reeked of performance. I hadn't made any promises, not to them. The only assurance I'd ever given was to keep the past alive long enough to be remembered. That didn't mean inherited. Later that afternoon, a second envelope came. This one wasn't typed. It was a greeting card, white lilies embossed on the front, soft pink edges. The kind people buy when they want to make you think they're praying for you without actually saying your name out loud. Inside was Sadie's handwriting, loopy and inconsistent. Nana, I'm sorry if we upset you. I didn't mean to go through your things. I just thought maybe you'd forgotten how beautiful some of those pieces are. I always imagined wearing the opal brooch to my graduation. It reminds me of you. Please don't be mad. Love, Sadie. There was a sticky note folded into the crease. P.S. Mom says you've been under stress. If you need help organizing anything or want to go through the jewelry together, I'd love to. I know how much it means to you. I stared at the note. Means to me. It's always meant something to me. That's the part they get wrong. It never meant something just for me. It meant something through me, through who wore it before, through who might understand it next. They wanted to sort the jewelry like it was silverware, to divide it up by style or sparkle or how well it matched Sadie's cap and gown. But what they never asked, never once, was where each piece had come from, or what it had endured. I sat with the letter for a long while before tucking it into the drawer with the cake pans. That's where I kept things I couldn't throw away but didn't need to see. Around 5, I heard the knock. Not rushed, not tentative, just calculated. I opened the door halfway. Nicole stood there in a cream blouse, her lipstick too bright for the hour. Her nails matched her phone case, which she kept in her hand like it might ring with salvation. Hi, she said, voice high and light. I brought chamomile. Figured we could have a little tea and talk. I didn't invite her in. I just stepped aside and let the door stay half open. She took it as permission. In the kitchen, she looked around like she always did, like she was cataloging what needed updating. I poured water into the kettle and said nothing. She sat, smoothed her skirt, and gave me a smile like I was a wayward student. So, I know things have been misread, but Sadie was genuinely hurt. You know she adores you. I stirred the honey into the teacups and placed one in front of her. She adored the idea of me, I said, and the idea that my things would become hers, there's a difference. Nicole blinked, but her smile didn't falter. You're part of our family, Ruth. Everything that was yours will always be treasured. That's why we were so surprised. I leaned against the counter, scarves trailing slightly as I crossed my arms. I didn't donate jewelry, I said plainly. I donated memory, to someone who knew what it was worth. Nicole flinched. You mean Delia, she said, her voice slipping slightly out of tune. I nodded. Yes, Delia. There it was, finally. The crack. Nicole shifted in her chair, her composure curling at the edges. She's not part of this family anymore. She's more a part of it than Sadie, I replied. At least she asked about the stories. Nicole set down her cup with unnecessary care. You don't know what that looks like to people, Ruth. You giving heirlooms to someone who's well estranged. It sends a message. I hope it does, I said. Silence. She stared at me for a long moment, then stood and adjusted her purse strap. I tried, she said. Mark thought maybe this was grief, maybe some kind of late-life crisis. I didn't reply. Not with words. I just tilted my head slightly, the same way Joseph used to when someone talked down to him at the hardware store. Nicole's lips tightened. We'll be in touch. Just think about Sadie. She's young. She doesn't understand. She understands more than you think, I said, but she learned from you what to value. That did it. Nicole left without another word, and I closed the door softly behind her. I didn't feel triumphant, just clean. I returned to the kitchen, poured myself the second cup of tea she left behind, and sat by the window. Outside, dusk was pulling the last of the light from the sky, the kind of gray-blue that makes everything feel like memory. I took the tea in both hands and let the silence settle again. Not stale this time, but sacred. Some battles don't need swords, just stillness, and a refusal to hand your name over in exchange for politeness. The next morning arrived gray and slow, the kind of light that made everything look like it hadn't slept well. I took my tea outside, wrapped in a heavier cardigan than usual, one that still smelled faintly of cedar and old perfume. The front porch had always been my favorite part of the house. Joseph and I had painted the railing ourselves one summer, laughing between brushstrokes while the radio played songs we didn't know the words to. It was small, barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant, but it was mine. I sat down and watched the neighborhood come alive, dogs being walked by sleepy-eyed owners, a couple of high schoolers dragging backpacks bigger than they were, familiar sights. But then I noticed the car, parked 2 houses down, idling, unmarked, dark gray, not flashy enough to belong to Nicole, not modest enough to be a stranger. It didn't move for nearly 20 minutes. I wasn't afraid, but I was alert. I reached into the envelope slot of the mailbox beside me and pulled out a folded scrap of newspaper, left deliberately, no address, no headline. Inside was a single printout. Estate planning options, elder transition and memory care rights, with a contact number circled twice in red ink. No name, no note, just an implication. I folded it slowly, tucked it under my scarf, and brought it inside. The door felt heavier when I closed it. That afternoon, I got a call from the bank. Mrs. Marino, the woman asked, politely cheerful. We just had a quick verification issue. It seems there was a recent inquiry into your account activity. We wanted to confirm it was initiated by you. It wasn't, I said. The voice on the other end tightened. Careful now. We've flagged it for now. No action taken. But if you suspect any unauthorized access, we can help set up additional protections. I thanked her, wrote down the time, and hung up. Then I went to the locked drawer in the hall desk and pulled out the folder marked contingencies. Inside was everything. Photocopies of legal documents, my notarized will, statements and notes written in my own handwriting, confirming when and why I'd made certain decisions. I added a fresh sheet of paper. Date. Today's date. Note. Unauthorized inquiry into financial account, suspected. Family members not granted access. Contacted bank at 2:08 p.m., requesting formal lock on external viewing rights. Underneath that, I wrote one more sentence. Protection is not paranoia when the wolves come in suits. That night, I turned off the porch light and pulled the blinds tighter than usual. 2 days passed without contact. Then Saturday morning, I received an invitation. Hand-delivered, embossed. Too much effort for too little sincerity. Join us for Sadie's senior portrait reveal and brunch, family only. Date, time, address listed below. Nicole's handwriting, overly loopy, Sadie's name written across the front in gold script like she was royalty. They wanted me to show up, smile for a picture, and pretend nothing had happened. Pretend we were still a unit. That I was still the doting matriarch, with nothing left to offer but polite smiles and approval. I tucked the card inside my recipe book without reading the back. I did not plan to attend. But that evening, I got another call, this time from Sadie. Nana. Her voice was soft, cautious. Can I come by tomorrow? Just us? I need to talk to you. I paused before answering. Are you coming as Sadie? I asked, or as someone else's messenger? There was a hesitation on the line. As me, she said finally. I promise. I agreed. She came by around 3 the next day, wearing a hoodie too big for her and no makeup, hair tucked in a messy bun. She looked smaller than usual, not physically, just dimmer, as if something had chipped at her shine. I led her to the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of lemonade, and we sat at the table without speaking for a while. She was the one who broke the silence. I saw your brooch, she said, on a woman in a video that Delia posted. She was standing in front of the shelter, talking about second chances. I nodded. It looked better on her than it ever did in your drawer, she added quietly. That's the point, I said. She fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve. Mom was furious, said it made us look bad, said you were being vindictive. Do you believe that? I asked. Sadie looked down. No, I think you were trying to be kind in a way that she doesn't understand. That surprised me. I didn't know the stories, she added. I just thought, pretty things, that's all they were to me. And now? I want to know, she said, if you'll still tell me. I studied her face, so familiar and yet newly sincere. The girl who had laughed at my earrings now looked like she was ready to listen. So I told her. Not all of it, not yet, but enough. About the green cameo, about Morocco, about how Joseph once hid a necklace in a pie box just to make me laugh. She laughed, too, real laughter this time. And for a moment, the ache inside my chest felt less like erosion and more like space being made for something else. Maybe not restoration, but beginning. When she left, she didn't ask for anything. She didn't try to reclaim the pieces I'd given away. She just hugged me, held on a second longer than usual, and whispered, "Thank you for not forgetting who I was supposed to be." That night, I sat in the armchair again, wrapped in my scarves, a small leather journal resting on my lap. And I wrote her name on the first page. Not because she'd earned everything back, but because she'd earned the chance to know the truth before it was too late. I didn't go to the brunch. I knew that if I walked into Nicole's freshly polished dining room with its curated table spreads and the gold-lettered "Family is Everything" sign hung by the stairs, I'd be expected to smile and pose like a souvenir. I'd be asked to perform gratitude, not feel it. Instead, I spent the morning dusting the photo frames in my hallway. Most people clean to erase things. I clean to remember. Each frame held a moment, a crooked tooth smile, a blurry beach day, Joseph in a Christmas sweater he swore he hated but never took off. These images were all frozen versions of love before it became conditional. I paused at one particular photo. Sadie was 7, sitting on the porch steps in her yellow overalls, hands stained red from the strawberry jam we made together that summer. I remembered the way she kept dipping her fingers in the pot, laughing every time I caught her. She didn't ask for anything then, she just wanted to be near me. I ran my finger along the edge of the frame and let that memory soften something in my chest that had hardened over the past few weeks. There was a knock on the door at noon. This time I expected it. I opened it to find Mark. No card, no flowers, no pretense. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and his face looked older than I remembered, more lined, less sure. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stepped aside. "You can come in, but only if you're here to talk, not persuade." He nodded, stepping past the threshold like it weighed something. We sat in the living room facing each other like a pair of opponents with a chessboard neither of us wanted to move. He cleared his throat. "Sadie told me she stopped by." "She did," I said. "She listened." He nodded. "She's been quieter lately, thoughtful. That's what happens when you stop being told what to feel." He didn't argue. Instead, he pulled a small object from his coat pocket and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was the velvet pouch that once held the silver leaf brooch. "She brought this back," he said. "Said she didn't feel right keeping it, not until she knew the whole story." I stared at it. "Did you read the story?" I asked. Mark looked at the pouch like it might answer for him. "No," he admitted. I wasn't ready. I believed him. Silence sat with us for a long moment. Finally, he said, I'm not proud of how things played out. Nicole gets forceful, and I let her lead because it was easier. But I should have asked you, Mom, about the jewelry, about everything. I took a breath. You should have seen me. He flinched at that, the way people do when the truth lands too close to bone. I know, he said quietly. I thought I did, but I see now we only ever looked at what you gave, not at who you were giving from. I watched him as he said it. Not with suspicion, but with caution. Because apologies are easy. Change is not. He gestured to the hallway. I saw the photo of Sadie just now, the one with the jam. She used to ask about that day a lot, said it was the best sandwich she ever had. I remember, I said, voice quieter now. He reached for the pouch again, but instead of handing it to me, he placed it back in his coat. Maybe someday Sadie will earn this back. Until then, I'll keep it safe. I nodded. It wasn't about the brooch anymore, it was about the recognition. Mom, he added, you gave those pieces to someone they never expected, and I think that's what made them mad. Not the loss, the choice. They were never mine to hoard, I said. They were mine to honor. He looked down at his hands. I'd like to come by sometime, just to talk, not about the will, not about jewelry, just to remember with you. You can, I said, but don't bring expectations, bring questions. Mark nodded, eyes glistening just a little. He stood, hesitated, and then leaned down and kissed the top of my head like he used to when he was 13 and still afraid of disappointing me. When he left, the house was quiet again, but not heavy. I walked into the kitchen, pulled the small cast iron pan from the cabinet, and set it on the stove. Then I opened the old recipe book to the dog-eared page where the jam recipe lived, next to a note Joseph had scrawled one morning, "Don't forget to taste as you go." The kitchen filled with the scent of sugar and memory. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman on the edge of someone else's story. I felt like the narrator again. By Wednesday, the calls had stopped. The silence didn't feel like surrender. It felt like recalibration, the way people pause, not because they understand, but because they're trying to find a new angle. I'd heard that silence before, after Joseph passed, when everyone brought casseroles and condolences for 2 weeks, and then disappeared when I didn't perform my grief according to their schedule. That same hush now filled the spaces between every knock that didn't come, every message that didn't arrive. But that was fine. Sometimes quiet is the only honest language left. I spent most of that day in the garage, sorting through the boxes that hadn't been opened in years. Joseph's old tools, a stack of expired coupons he used to clip like they were love notes, Christmas decorations from before they went color-coordinated. It wasn't nostalgia I was after, it was context, proof that a life had been lived with care, not convenience. At the very back of the shelves, I found a small wooden crate marked Church Sale 19. Inside, nestled between newspaper clippings and dried-out ribbon, were trinkets I'd long forgotten. A porcelain bird missing its tail, a wooden rosary, a brass key with no lock, and wrapped in tissue at the bottom was a pendant I hadn't seen since the year Mark left for college. Oval, green glass with flecks of gold foil beneath the surface. Not expensive, but beautiful in the way things are when no one tries to make them look perfect. I remembered the day I bought it. 10 cents. A woman at a church booth said it used to belong to her sister. She wore it when she wanted to feel important, the woman told me. Didn't matter where she was going. I had kept it all these years, and never once worn it. I brought it inside, rinsed the dust from the chain, and placed it gently on the kitchen table. Then I called the shelter. Delia answered on the second ring. "Ruth," she said, sounding tired but warm, "I was just thinking about you." "That's what they say when they weren't," I replied with a smile. She laughed. "Guilty. It's been a week." "I have something else," I said. "Not much, but I think someone might need it." She hesitated. "You don't have to keep giving things away. You know that, right?" "I'm not giving them away," I said. "I'm putting them back into circulation. Memory shouldn't rot in drawers." That night, I polished the pendant and wrote a note. "For when you forget that you matter, this once helped someone feel seen." From another woman who once forgot. The next morning, I left the house before dawn. The sun was only beginning to consider rising, the streets still yawning with quiet. I slipped the envelope containing the pendant into the donation box outside the shelter. No signature, no flourish, just an offering. Just an offering. On my way home, I stopped by the bakery at the corner. I hadn't been in for months. The girl behind the counter was new. She had a septum ring and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much too early. "Coffee?" she asked. "Just a roll," I said, "and maybe a reason to sit for a few minutes." She smiled and handed me a tray. I chose the corner seat. Small table, chipped edge, a view of the window where condensation drew lazy patterns. I tore the roll in half and took slow bites, thinking about all the tables I had sat at in my life. Some where I belonged, some where I was tolerated, fewer where I was invited. I was halfway through when someone entered and sat at the table across from me without a word. Sadie. Her hair was damp, pulled back loosely, no makeup again. She looked younger than she had in years. "You followed me," I said. "No," she replied. "I guessed. You always came here after the market." I nodded. She placed a folded piece of paper on my table and didn't speak for a while. Finally, she said, "I wrote down what I remember, about your jewelry. The ones I saw, the ones you told me stories about. I wanted to get it right." I unfolded the paper. It was shaky, inconsistent, full of crossed-out words and sudden details. The earrings you wore to Grandpa's retirement dinner, the pin with the missing stone that looked like a raindrop, the necklace that left a green line on your neck but made you smile anyway. I didn't realize I was crying until she reached for a napkin. "I'm sorry," she said, "not just for the things I took or said, but for treating everything like it was waiting to be handed down, not held with care." "You're learning," I said softly. "That matters." She looked at me, eyes wet. "You always made me feel like I could be more. But I wanted to prove it by owning things. I didn't realize it had nothing to do with what I wore." I reached across the table and took her hand. "No one ever taught you that worth isn't loud," I said, "but you'll teach someone else one day." We sat like that for a long while, two women, two generations, no longer at odds but in quiet alignment. Before we parted, she asked, "Do you think I'll ever be ready for one of your pieces?" I smiled. "If you keep remembering more than you take, then yes." She walked me to the corner. We didn't hug. It wasn't necessary. The goodbye was already understood. At home, I pulled out my journal again. But this time, I started a new section. For her, someday. It had been 3 weeks since the brooch was returned, and 2 since Nicole sat across my table without performance. Time hadn't healed anything dramatic, but it had softened the edges. That was more than I ever expected. The house felt lighter now. Not emptier, lighter, as if some invisible weight had stepped down and let the floorboards breathe again. I found myself humming when I cleaned, pausing at windows not to check for visitors, but to let the light reach my face. My journal was half filled now, each page a slow reclamation of everything I thought I'd lost the right to tell. I was sitting on the porch with a mug of warm tea when the letter arrived. It wasn't in a formal envelope. No address label, no return stamp. Just my name in shaky cursive on the front and a small flower sticker sealing the flap. Inside was a card, hand-painted with blue wildflowers. Delia's name signed in the corner, just as she used to sign her sketches when she was a teenager, looped, slanted, unapologetically hers. The message read, "Ruth. The brooch was worn last week by a woman named Marta. She walked into court with it pinned over her heart, facing the man who hurt her. She won. She said it made her feel like someone was standing beside her. Thank you for giving us that. D." I didn't cry. I just sat there holding the card, letting it speak louder than it needed to. That brooch had once sat on my dresser for years, untouched. Now it had gone to war for someone I'd never met and helped her win. It felt holy. Later that afternoon, I stood in front of the mirror and opened the last drawer in the armoire, the one I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a velvet pouch containing the only piece I hadn't decided on yet, a narrow gold ring, delicate and simple, with a tiny inscription on the inside, worn nearly smooth by time. It had belonged to my grandmother. Not her wedding band that went to her eldest daughter, my Aunt Lena. This was something else, a ring she wore on her pinky for as long as I knew her. She called it her dignity ring, told me once that she bought it for herself the day she walked out of a job where they paid her less than the men for being nice. She said, "I may not leave a fortune, but I'll leave you proof that I never settled." I slipped it onto my own finger that afternoon and looked at my reflection, not younger, not wiser, just present. That evening, Sadie came by unannounced. She carried a small woven basket with fabric lining the inside and a folded note tucked beneath her hand. "I brought something," she said, stepping into the hallway with careful feet, as though the house itself might judge her. She set the basket down on the coffee table, unwrapped the linen, and revealed a collection of charms, handmade ones, molded from clay and wire, some painted, some raw. Each one had a tag, for resilience, for starting over, for silence that deserves to be broken. "I've been making them with Delia," she explained, her voice hesitant but clear. She said sometimes people need something to hold before they believe they can hold themselves up. I reached into the basket and picked up the charm marked "for silence that deserves to be broken." It was shaped like a small bird, its wings uneven, but lifted mid-flight. "You made this?" I asked. She nodded. "I think I needed to make it more than they needed to receive it." She then handed me the note. "Nana, I don't want to inherit your jewelry. I want to inherit your eyes. The way you see people before they announce who they are. The way you hold stories without trying to edit them. If there's something left to pass down, let it be that. Love. Sadie." I folded the note slowly and placed it on the table beside the charm. I didn't speak right away. I let the weight of her words settle. "Then you will," I said finally. "You already are." She smiled, not with the eagerness of someone hoping to be praised, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had made something from within. She stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup, simple and warm, and she did the dishes without being asked. Before leaving, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a single red bead. "This was from the first bracelet I ever made with you. I found it in the carpet last week. I thought it was gone forever." "Funny," I said. "I thought that about us too." She held my gaze, then nodded. "See you soon." After she left, I sat at the kitchen table, the note still beside me, the basket of charms casting faint shadows under the lamp. In that moment, I understood something I hadn't been able to articulate before. They mocked my jewelry because they only saw ornaments, not anchors, not echoes. They saw sparkle, not story. But now, those pieces were stories again, some living on in hands that needed them, some resting quietly in drawers, waiting for their turn. Legacy wasn't about what you left behind in a safe. It was about what someone picked up and chose to carry forward. It was the first Sunday in months I hadn't woken with a list in my head. No chores, no letters to sort, no unopened envelopes taunting me from the kitchen counter. Just stillness, earned, not imposed. The morning came in quietly through the windows, no longer filtered through dread or expectation. The air smelled of soap and early spring. I left the bedroom window cracked open, just enough to let in the scent of thawed earth and distant garden soil, like the world itself had taken a breath and remembered what it meant to grow again. I had no visitors planned, no errands to run. The day belonged entirely to me, and I was startled by how unfamiliar that felt. I moved through the house slowly, barefoot on the old hardwood, passing objects I no longer saw as burdens. A bowl of keys by the door, the shelf that held a chipped teacup I couldn't bring myself to throw away. For once, none of it felt like clutter. It felt like texture. I made tea and brought it to the back room, the one Joseph used to call the sun corner, even though it barely got more than a slant of light in the late morning. I hadn't sat in there since the week he passed. The room always felt paused, like it was waiting for someone to resume a conversation that never finished. Today, I opened the curtains. The dust danced immediately, startled by its own visibility, rising like a swarm of tiny ghosts. I smiled. Then I sat in the armchair that still carried the indentation of his weight and looked around as though seeing it for the first time. A small cabinet in the corner caught my eye. It held a dozen objects, none of them especially valuable. A broken watch, a compass that never pointed north, a wooden box filled with buttons and scrap cloth. Joseph had collected them over the years, insisting they each had a purpose he'd yet to discover. He used to say, "Some things just need to be kept until you know why." Back then, I thought it was charming. Now I understood. I opened the box and sorted through the scraps, not to organize them, but to listen, to touch what had waited in silence for someone to ask, "Where were you meant to go?" In the bottom of the box was a thin gold chain, tangled and missing its clasp. I held it up to the light. The links shimmered, delicate and stubborn. It wasn't mine, not originally. I had no memory of wearing it, buying it, or being gifted it. But I remembered seeing it once. Sadie had worn it to a cousin's birthday party when she was 13. She borrowed it from her friend, and when I complimented it, she beamed like she'd made it herself. I set the chain on the table beside my tea and began to write. "Sadie, one day, someone will give you something that doesn't quite work. It may be broken, or lost, or forgotten. Don't rush to fix it. Sit with it first. Ask what it was meant to hold. Sometimes the clasp comes later. Nana. I folded the note and placed it into a small envelope, which I tucked into the journal under the section I had labeled for her, someday. It wasn't a will, it was a seed. Later that afternoon, I pulled open the drawer where I'd kept my scarves, the oldest ones, the fraying ones, the ones I wore when no one was looking. I selected 3, the navy blue with the stitched edge, the dusty pink from my first visit to Florence, and the mustard yellow Joseph once said made me look like autumn was following me. One by one, I tied them to the back of the kitchen chairs. Not because I was giving them away, but because I wanted them to stay visible. I wanted the house to hold echoes that didn't hide. I cooked a small dinner, a pot of lentils, a piece of buttered bread. I set the table for one, but lit 2 candles, one for me, one for memory. Not mourning, just acknowledgement. And when the phone rang, I didn't flinch. It was Mark. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice soft. "Sadie told me you've been writing." "I have," I said. "I'm not done." "I'd like to read it someday," he said, "if that's okay." "It is, but only if you understand it wasn't written to explain myself. It was written to be found by someone ready." He didn't rush his answer. "Then I'll wait until I'm ready." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Good." Before we hung up, he added, "We were talking about having you over next week. Nothing fancy, just dinner. Sadie's cooking." I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. "Tell her to set an extra chair," I said, "and leave it empty." "For who?" he asked. "For whoever's not ready yet." He paused. "That might be me." "Then sit in it," I said gently. That night, I sat again in the sun corner, a blanket over my knees, the journal resting on the side table. The house no longer whispered. It breathed. Not because it was full, but because it was finally allowed to be honest. A week passed, then another. Each day folded into the next like pages in a book without titles, just moments, stitched together with breath and quiet choices. I found myself drawn more and more to the margins of the house, the places that never held visitors, never made it into family photos. The laundry room, the narrow hallway between the pantry and the back door, the stool beside the radiator where Joseph used to tie his boots. These places held no ceremonies, no heirlooms, but they were honest. And honesty, I was learning, was the last thing to be given up and the first thing forgotten. On Wednesday morning, I received a letter, this time from someone unexpected. It was from my niece, Celia, Peter's daughter, Delia's daughter. We hadn't spoken in years. Not out of anger, just distance, and the awkward tangle that follows after family fractures and people aren't sure whose side they're allowed to choose. Her handwriting was all lean slants and tight loops. I could tell she was trying not to take up too much space on the page. "Dear Aunt Ruth, Mom told me what you did, about the jewelry, about the stories. I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted to thank you for reminding her that her life wasn't just a detour in someone else's legacy. She's been different, softer, maybe, but more rooted. I never really knew what to call what I was carrying until she read me the note you gave her." I paused reading there. I remembered that note. I'd written it years ago, never intending for anyone to see it but Delia. A single sentence folded between other words. "You are not the mistake. You are the proof that love survived one." I finished Celia's letter with a slow exhale. She closed with this. "If there's anything you want me to remember, please tell me. I want to know more than names and dates. I want to know how you stayed kind." I set the letter on the table beside my teacup and sat for a long while, watching the steam swirl. Then I reached for the drawer where I kept the journal and turned to the back cover. There were only a few pages left. So I opened a new one and titled it, "For Those Who Came Late, But Came Willing." The day was cool, bright, the kind of weather that made you want to breathe a little deeper. I bundled up in my coat and my oldest scarf, the one with the olive and rust threading unraveling at the edges, and walked to the old neighborhood library. It wasn't far. 3 blocks, past the little playground with the rusted swing set and the park bench where Joseph once spilled an entire cup of coffee trying to feed pigeons. Inside the library, it smelled like forgotten promises and newly turned pages. The shelves were thinner than they used to be, but the quiet was intact. I made my way to the archive room. In the back corner, where the air was colder and the lights flickered faintly, was the community bulletin board. Photos, flyers, handwritten announcements for piano lessons and lost pets. I pinned something between a flyer for a church bake sale and a children's drawing of a dinosaur. It was a copy of one of my stories, not signed, just titled, "When You're Told It's Worthless, But You Know It's History." At the bottom I wrote, "If this reminded you of something you haven't told anyone, please write it down. Tape it here, leave it, or take this one with you. Either way, you're not alone." I stepped back, unsure if it looked too plain, but I reminded myself that real things rarely shout. Before I left, I watched a young woman pin up a recipe card next to my paper. I didn't ask her name, she didn't ask mine. That was enough. Later that evening, as twilight bruised the sky and the windows began to reflect the room more than the world outside, I took the last item out of my jewelry drawer. A small charm, barely the size of a thumbnail, an acorn, carved from walnut wood, with a single word etched on the back. Begin. It had been a gift from Joseph on our 15th anniversary. I remembered how sheepish he looked when he gave it to me, expecting me to laugh. "I know it's not diamonds," he said, "but it's got roots." He always knew how to speak in symbols. That night, I sewed the charm into the hem of one of my scarves, not hidden, just tucked quiet, but there. I didn't know who would wear it next, or if anyone would even notice it was there, but it comforted me to know that something I carried might one day speak for me when I'm not in the room. Some gifts don't arrive with ribbon. Some are handed over in the way you listen, the way you walk away from someone and come back different. And if I had been mocked for the jewelry I kept, for the stories I guarded, then let the punchline be this: I never lost anything. I placed it all where it could finally be found. I once heard someone say that stories outlive the voices that told them. I didn't believe that until I started seeing mine mirrored back in others, not word for word, but in gestures, in pauses, in the way Sadie touched a necklace at the thrift shop last week and asked, "Who do you think wore this?" to something that mattered, or how Mark stopped mid-sentence during Sunday dinner, looked around the table and said softly, "We should listen more before we plan." Those moments weren't mine in the possessive sense, but they came from me, like light filtered through old glass, changed, but still glowing with the source. This morning, I woke before the alarm. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the house was already stirring in the way old houses do, pipes settling, floors whispering under their own weight. I wrapped myself in the cardigan that smelled faintly of lavender and rain, tied on the scarf with the tiny wooden acorn sewn into the hem, and brewed a pot of coffee that steamed up the kitchen windows. Today was the day. Not of endings, but acknowledgments. I pulled out the small box I had kept tucked beneath the bottom shelf of the hutch. Inside it were the last 4 pieces of jewelry I hadn't decided on, left not because I was unsure, but because I was waiting. Waiting for what? I hadn't known. Until this week. Sadie had asked me, quietly, while folding napkins after dinner, "Could I come over and record you sometime? Just your voice, telling me stories about you, about Grandpa, about the things we never asked." I said yes, without hesitation. That was how I knew it was time. I wrapped the items one by one, not in tissue, but in notes. The filigree ring went with a story about Florence and a stolen fig tart. The small cameo would be paired with a memory of my mother combing her hair before church, humming off-key. The mismatched pearl earring, long separated from its twin, would travel with a lesson about beauty not always needing symmetry. And the last, an old silver chain with a stubborn clasp, was given a line I whispered aloud as I folded it gently, "For the hands that don't give up on tangled things." I didn't need to know who would receive them, only that they would. After lunch, I walked the box to the shelter where Delia worked. She wasn't there. A young woman at the desk, barely 20, hair dyed purple and clipped into uneven pigtails, took the box from me and smiled without asking questions. That was a gift in itself. When I got home, the house was cooler. The clouds had rolled in, but it didn't feel empty. Instead, it felt expectant. I lit a candle on the kitchen table, not scented, just simple beeswax, and sat with my journal, now near its final page. I opened to the last spread, the one I had saved. The page was unlined. I had always imagined it would be for something profound, a summary, a parting truth. But as I looked at the flame flickering beside me, I realized it didn't need to be complex. So I wrote. They mocked my jewelry. They thought it was vanity. But I was never keeping gold. I was keeping memory from vanishing. Then underneath, smaller, and now, so are they. I closed the journal, set it beside the charm basket Sadie had made, and stood. The light was dimming, Evening had come with a gentle gray veil, and the wind tapped the windows like a polite guest who didn't need to come in just to say hello. I moved through the house one last time that evening, not with urgency, but with reverence, touching the backs of chairs, running my hand along the worn banister, straightening a picture frame, not fixing anything, just honoring its shape. In the hallway, the frame I'd hung weeks ago, the one with the note that read, "They used to ask what you left behind, now they ask what you passed forward," was still centered, still level, still true. I didn't cry, I didn't feel the need to. The grief had passed, the kind that comes from being unseen. It had been replaced by something steadier, something like presence. The doorbell rang just as I returned to the kitchen. When I opened it, Sadie was there, holding a microphone and a thermos of hot cocoa. "Thought maybe we could start tonight," she said. "I'd like that," I said, stepping aside to let her in. As she unpacked her little recorder on the table, she looked at me and asked, "Where should we begin?" I sat across from her, adjusted my scarf, and smiled. "With the thing they tried to throw away," I said, "and what it became." Then I pressed the button on the recorder and began.